panel discussion, so if we could have our panelists.
Sarah Sondag again from Minnesota DOT. I'm moderating the session on sealing best practices or panel discussion. So first I just want to talk about a little bit of a broad overview of what some states are doing. We had a survey that was sent out. I'm not going to really go into detail with practices, but I thought it might be interesting to look at some of the results. So 7 out of 8 agencies that responded do have a crack sealing and deck sealing program. Crack sealing is performed for 3 agencies both, in-house crews and by contract. For 2 of the agencies solely by contract, and for 2 of the agencies by in-house crews. Deck sealing, on the other hand, for 3 of the agencies was performed by both contract and through in-house crews. 3 of the agencies reported that they sealed through contract only, and 1 agency through in-house crews only. For crack sealing, the top surface preparation that was utilized is blasting with compressed air, followed by sandblasting and shot blasting. Products utilized, top product used was epoxies, generic products, high molecular weight methacrylates, methyl methacrylates, and there were some others reported by agencies: gravity-fed resin, polyurethane, and an asphalt emulsion with silicone. 6 of the agencies had approved products lists. 4 of the agencies reported that they seal on a cyclical basis. A lot of the agencies were kind of within that 3 to 5, 6 year cycle. 1 agency did report 10 years. And 5 of those agencies do have best practice documents. For deck sealing, so more of penetrating sealers, the top surface preparation utilized by the agencies was blasting with compressed air, and then followed by sandblasting. I know for Minnesota, in some cases, we'll sandblast because potentially the white peg or the curing compound hasn't worn off, so that we'll need to blast that off. Products utilized, number 1 product utilized was silane, with 7 of the agencies reporting. 2 agencies used siloxane, 2 agencies used reactive sealer, including a soluble reactive silicate. When to begin deck sealing. So 3 of the agencies said when a new concrete deck or overlay is placed, then they implement a silane treatment program. 2 agencies said the season following a new deck or concrete overlay is placed. And then a number of the agencies also said it's as determined by the maintenance supervisor or asset engineer, or potentially if there's early age cracking. 6 agencies reported that they do have an approved products list. 5 agencies reported that they seal on a cyclical basis, but the resealing cycle ranged between 4 to 12 years. 5 agencies had best practice documents. I do have some of those links available, and I can send those out to the partnership. I didn't want to put that all in a presentation, but we can send more information out if other agencies are interested in looking at, approved products list or qualification processes or best practice documents. So now we have our panel, so I'd like to introduce them. They're graciously volunteered, or was voluntold, I don't know, to be on the panel to discuss their sealing practices. So we have Aaron Auer from North Dakota DOT, Walt Peters from Oklahoma DOT, and Jason DeRuyver from Michigan DOT. So I'm going to pass the microphone down, and maybe we'll just start with crack sealing. So go through maybe your procedures policy for crack sealing.
Well, we use a 2-part epoxy to seal our cracks. It's done in-house by our maintenance staff. We use a product from baking paints called Palco. And when the decks are new, we try to keep aggressively sealing them for the first year or 2. Once they stabilize, then they're on a 3-year cycle. This is when we do it. We simply use compressed air to blow out the cracks, to clean them. And we've had good success with it. The crews do a really good job crack sealing them, and we've been on a program now for probably about 10 years, and it's proven very beneficial for us.
Oklahoma does all their crack sealing by contract. The summer after construction of the bridge will typically, each of the 8 field divisions will have a sealing contract which includes the cracks, and usually there's not too many cracks on a new bridge, and you'll seal the individual cracks. Sometimes there are a lot of cracks, and we have flooded the whole bridge with either epoxy or HIMWIM. A lot of times we have a program where we see that a bridge has a lot of cracks, and we'll note it on an inspection report, and we'll come back and 10 years later or 15, 20 years later, we'll do a flood coat, which basically you're just pouring out epoxy that goes into the cracks, rubs off the surface, and it stays in the cracks, and hopefully they're sealed for another few years, and we get 4 or 5 years out of that.
In Michigan, we use epoxy for our crack chasing. We do it both by in-house forces and contracts. In our contracts, for all of our new decks and all of our rigid concrete overlays, the contractor is required to come back and chase all cracks before opening to traffic. And then additionally, in any deck patching operation in our contracts, they're required to come back and chase the perimeter of all deck patches with epoxy. In-house forces typically don't go out to a bridge just to chase cracks. It's more of a, while we're out there, we're going to do everything we can type of thing. So they'll chase cracks while they are, whatever they're doing on a bridge deck, and have a lane closure set up. They prepare the cracks with just sandblasting.
So before we move to deck sealing, I just wanted to open it up to see if there's any questions specifically on crack sealing, or if other agencies would like to talk about their procedures.
I was curious about the contract crack sealing. Do you guys have to go out and measure all the cracks before you let that contract, or does the quantities kind of get out of control on you when do you pay by the linear foot or by the bridge?
Okay, so the question is about the quantities for the crack sealing. This is measured up front, and the contractor just has the quantities, so hopefully we don't get too much overrun. And like I said, that's typically done on newer bridges where hopefully there's not that much cracking going on.
For Michigan's contract, crack sealing, it's flooding the deck with a healer sealer. And for the, where they have to chase all the cracks after they pour a new deck or with the rigid concrete overlay, that work is just told to the contractors is included in their items of work for constructing the deck.
Okay, then we'll move on to deck sealing for the different agencies.
Well, we were a little late in the game when we came to silane. I mean, we did it under new contracts, but we didn't do any follow-up treatments. In 2007, we had a minimum service level guidelines, and one of the things that it dictated was that we do silane treatments every 6 years. So we started a few years back with some trials, and we jumped into the game, and for our district, we chose an Avonic product. And we apply it all, with our own maintenance forces. We did a sprayer similar to what you've seen in other presentations. The crews, were a little skeptical at first. They'd never done it. This was something new for them, but they've gotten buy-in on it. They see the benefit to it. We've got all of our bridges, at least in our district, our first application of silane. In 6 years, we'll go back and apply our second round of silane.
Oklahoma, at the time of construction, we did apply a little bit of silane to the barrier wall or the rail. We do the underside of the deck, and if it's concrete, the outside face of the concrete beam. The summer following that bridge construction, we'll have secondary projects, which include, like I say, the deck sealing and the cracks. But the silane application, it has what we call performance tests. So the contractor, we got a list of approved products, and he can choose whatever he wants. But if he doesn't get this 0.15 inch penetration, then we reduce his pay. And there's also an absorption test, and that's I could get you those tests if you're willing. And I think the absorption test is like an Oklahoma department test. But anyway, when we do the upfront rail, that's just visual. We put a little dye in there, and we see to it that everything gets coated. And we've like Tim was mentioning earlier, research shows that we're getting 12 years plus out of our silane applications.
In Michigan, we've been doing thin epoxy overlays and healer sealers for 20 years, so it's what everyone's comfortable with, from our designers, our contractors, and our direct forces. So we haven't been doing a lot of silanes. Recently, we've started adding silanes to all of our barrier walls as we can get to them, and all of our new barrier walls have an initial silane treatment as well.
Are you all using blasting with compressed air or some other type of surface prep method?
For our surface prep, we've been using a pressure washer and a scrubber to clean our decks.
Okay, for the silanes, Tim was showing that shot blast, which to me is like a lawnmower, and the guy just goes around the deck and hits all the surface area, and we get a good preparation and hopefully good penetration.
We've been sandblasting our barrier walls and shot blasting our decks when we apply silanes.
Any questions or comments from the audience?
Is there any logic to the shot blast? I mean, if you break that surface, is it a detriment more than? I guess I'm just curious if the benefit of silane on a broken surface is more than leaving the paste there to resist the penetration.
We just use a really light and as fast as you can go shot blast that's only taking off the grease and the oils and dirt on the deck. It doesn't really take off the paste. Just kind of opens it up and abrades it a little bit.
I think the main purpose is just get the oil and the grease, and you want to open up the deck enough to where you get a little penetration.
What kind of a blast medium do you use?
I'm thinking it's steel shot. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tim. Tim said number 9 steel shot.
I mean, that's all we use is steel.
Do you have to replace the pavement markings after your application of silanes because of the prep work or anything like that?
That prep work is very, very not aggressive enough to take off any paint. It doesn't even touch it.
That's a concern with flood coats. It's not with silanes.
We haven't had to replace any pavement markings. They're done on a yearly basis, and after the silane treatments, it's been fine. We haven't seen any issues.
Are any of you using silanes on anything other than your decks and barrier walls? As Tim mentioned, it kind of seems like smart to do it to your pier caps and bridge sheets.
We've done some abutment walls where you've got open joints or finger joints. If we can get to the pier caps, we'll do those as well.
The Professor Lay at OSU is encouraging us to do that, and we plan to go look at some bridge and see if we want to pursue that.
A lot of our environmentalists have a love affair with coloring our bridges with various paints, and so I'm trying to break them of that so I can put silanes on. But I haven't been very successful yet.
Any other questions or comments? I know there were other states that responded to the survey with some of their sealing practices. Okay, I'm going to go back to crack sealing just for a minute. We performed in Minnesota a research study started in 2012, looking at different crack seal products. And when we were putting together our approved products list, we were looking at material qualifications, but we saw some differences in performance between some different products, and so we added a performance evaluation as part of our approved products list qualification process. And I'm just curious, have any other states utilized performance evaluations as part of approved products list?
I mean, we have not. I mean, what we looked for initially when we started was ease of use. We wanted a product that was one-to-one mix simply for the crews, very simple to mix up and to apply. We did not do any performance-based measures on it.
First started, we put in a dye, and we had some black lights, and we saw how far the penetration went, and I don't think we've done anything like that recently, and we don't have any performance requirements.
We don't have any specific performance requirements for silanes you're talking about, or anything? Oh, for crack sealing products? I mean, we have gone out and cored some cracks and measured the depths on some of them, but we don't have anything in our specification other than in our state, we'll have our direct forces apply it first and gauge the ease of use and whether or not it's set up and whether or not it performed like we thought it would, and then we'll go out on a rain day and see if our deck bottom is wet, and if it is, then we're like, well, then I guess it didn't work. So I don't know. We always require the manufacturer to be with us the first time we try their product to make sure we're doing it the way they want us to do it, so.
What about equipment for applications? I know different crews utilize different pieces of equipment. We saw it with Tim's presentation. I know in Minnesota for some silane applications, some crews are using truck-mounted spray bars, some are using just hand wands to spray. So could be we use like a AST pump too for crack sealing. Sometimes they use the ketchup bottles too, right, if they have additional crew members that are working on the deck. So any comments on equipment or best practices?
When we started out, we did a collection of water bottles and did it that way. And then we eventually migrated to mixers that mixed it in-house, similar to a syringe. And then for our silanes, we started out with a simple spray, hand spray pump, and that didn't go over so well. They didn't like doing it, so we've graduated to a UTV sprayer, and it's got electric pump and metered, so we know what we're putting down.
Since the contractors do it, I'm not really too sure how they're getting it in there, but anyway. I do see, when I go out and look at the deck, you can tell where they've sealed cracks, so I know they're doing it.
Yeah, we just crack sealing, ketchup bottle, or flood the deck. Silanes, they can go with, we have a walk-behind spray bar that is commercially available that we bought, or they'll use one of the little hand pump garden sprayers for the barrier walls, or if we're doing a massive barrier wall bridge, we'll have a commercial pump paint sprayer.
If you flood the deck, you broadcast sand for skid resistance?
If you do a flood coat, you're making the deck surface very, very slippery. So you have to have broadcast sand, as Ed said, and we did have a bad experience once where the sand just kept coming up in traffic, and there was a very long bridge, and the motorcycles particularly didn't like it. So I think Tim's been studying the size of the sand and stuff to try to prevent that from ever happening again.
I mean, we don't put anything on silanes because it doesn't change the skid, but on the epoxy healer sealers, we do put sand, and when we crack chase, we'll sprinkle 5-gallon pails. We'll just hand sprinkle a little bit of sand on the cracks when we're done.
The sand's going to wear off. It'll be gone probably by the next winter, so it doesn't stay around. The epoxy just goes into the cracks. It doesn't stay anywhere else.
For silanes, we're not putting anything down. We have done a couple flood seals where we have applied some sand.
So how are you determining when you need to crack chase, I should say, or between versus flood seal?
We've done a few flood seals on contract seal deck overlays where we've had extensive cracking. On a maintenance end, we haven't done any flood seals with our own forces. As far as crack sealing, we try to get it the next year after the deck is poured, and then we put it on a 3-year cycle after that.
I don't have a good answer for that, but one thing we have tried is a combination silane flood coat, which if we're going to do silane, say, on 12 years, then maybe it would be logical to look at a combination, because I think as time goes on, the cracking gets worse in just about all the decks out there.
When I was a bridge inspector, the best time to inspect a bridge deck was an hour after it stopped raining, and I could actually see all the cracks. So based on that philosophy, if we're going to go out to a bridge deck with the intent of crack sealing, we just flood it. We don't rely on the contractor and the inspector to think they've identified all the cracks. So that's our philosophy, is to just flood it.
Used to be that we would flood coat with crack sealing with Greg, and then broadcast sand till refusal, and then we realized that the broadcasting the sand till refusal wicks all the crack sealer out of the cracks. Are you guys noticing that, or have you modified your specification to consider that?
I mean, our contractors have to wait, I think, 20 minutes to a half an hour until it's tacky before they can broadcast sand. They just can't throw it down and then broadcast sand on it right away. So it gives it that soak in and penetration time.
So Tim presented earlier, and he related some information to efficiency of spraying on sealers, where that spray bar is, and loss of material and things of that nature. And, you know, Jason's talking about flooding bridge decks. So what's the efficiency of the material between those two approaches? I mean, if you're flooding, and I have not done this type of work myself, but if you're flooding it, is there a lot of waste, or are you flooding to saturation and recovering? What's the process with flooding versus spraying? Do you follow what I'm saying?
I mean, for the healer sealers, when I say flooding, I mean they mix, 5-10 gallons of it together in a giant solid bushel basket, and they dump it on the bridge, and then they push it around with brooms. Our specification has an application rate. I just don't know it off the top of my head of approximately how much they should be. It's the same as silanes, where it's, square feet per gallon. It's much smaller than silane, though. And when I say much smaller square feet, so you're using more product.
When we did that combination, the silane and the epoxy healer sealer was both applied with spray equipment, but the epoxy healer sealer, you broom it in, just like he was saying. You work it into the surface. You don't want it to puddle.
And I keep forgetting to mention, we have started combining, in some cases, we'll do a silane first and then throw the epoxy healer sealer over the top of it.
For Minnesota too, typically the silanes are sprayed and the flood coats are more of a crack sealer. And so those are usually mixed in, like Jason said, in buckets and dumped and squeegeed out.
Silane comes in obviously different percentages, and just curious what each state uses and why they would use that percentage. Versus 100% silane, which is the cheapest. Why would you use, the 20, 40, or 80%?
Yeah, we've used strictly 100%. I guess we didn't investigate the others that I'm aware of.
On our silane applications, we typically used the 40%. When we did the combination silane flood coat, we used 100%.
We only use 100% in Michigan.
Well, like Tim said, we started doing it back in the 70s, and I think that 100% wasn't available back then, and I guess that's the way we've always done it.
We have both 40% and 100% approved on the approved products list, and it depends on the district. A lot of our districts are moving toward the 100%, but kind of like Walt said in the beginning, they started using the 40% silane and saw some good results, and it's a little bit less expensive. But a lot of those districts are moving to 100% now.
You're talking about the state bridges. Are the municipal ones that are off the state system starting to see this and adopt this process? Then the next question would be, if they get state money, you're going to start putting it in their cost participation agreements that they start doing things like this? It might not be, you may not know the answer, but.
Yeah, I haven't noticed any in our area that other local agencies have done the silanes or the crack sealing. As far as cost participation, it hasn't been discussed that I'm aware of. I mean, normal maintenance is always there, but we don't drill down to those specifics.
State increased their clear cover. We went to epoxy rebar, and we went to silanes. The local government system, sometimes in an urban area they'll do that, but generally we've stayed with the black steel. And I remember going to like some Edmund bridges that were kind of remote, and I was seeing that their decks were coming apart compared to our decks built in the same era. And I'm concerned about the way we handle our local government bridges at the construction time.
I mean, we have a few local agency counties that have their own bridge crew that will do maintenance and will do some of these practices. Also, our local agencies, when they submit bridge projects that they want us to fund, they're allowed to submit for maintenance projects to be done by contractors as well.
Add into that for an Indiana local perspective, there's a number of counties in Indiana who are using silanes to seal their decks.
In Minnesota too, it may depend on the agency or the county, similar to Michigan. We have had some of our crews go and help some of the counties and local agencies. We've brought some of our crack sealing pumps along and kind of worked with them on the process to seal their decks. We've also tried to introduce some training, so we have some e-learning modules available to the local agencies for these types of activities.
One other thing on local agencies, MDOT does a lot, is we always offer to have the local agency crews come work with our crews for a little while and learn how to do bridge maintenance. Or, I have a project coming up in 2 weeks where we're going to help a local agency bridge crew replace a joint on one of their bridges, so they have that knowledge brought into their county.
I was just curious. I know we don't have a lot of local agencies here, but we do have a few from Minnesota, and I know from a couple of other local agencies. I was wondering if if anyone would want to comment on that, if whether they have done, what they do for maintenance on their bridges in those counties.
All right, well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.